Question 1. Risk assessment procedures indicate that a suspect in a burglary case in Boise, Idaho, may possess a mobile phone containing crucial evidence. Considering the legal framework governing searches and seizures in Idaho, which of the following actions is the most appropriate for the Boise Police Department to take to lawfully obtain and examine the contents of the suspect's mobile phone? Option A. Request the mobile phone provider to remotely access and provide the data from the suspect's phone without a warrant. Option B. Obtain a search warrant from a judge, demonstrating probable cause that the phone contains evidence of the burglary. Option C. Seize the mobile phone immediately upon the suspect's detention, based on the belief that it likely contains evidence. Option D. Ask the suspect for consent to search the phone after they have been arrested and read their Miranda rights. Correct answer is B. Obtain a search warrant from a judge, demonstrating probable cause that the phone contains evidence of the burglary. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the legal and ethical obligations to protect individual privacy and due process. The Boise Police Department, like any law enforcement agency in Idaho, operates under specific state statutes and constitutional protections that govern how evidence can be obtained and used. Misinterpreting or overstepping these boundaries can lead to the suppression of evidence, civil liability, and damage to public trust. Careful judgment is required to ensure that investigative actions are both effective and lawful. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves obtaining a warrant based on probable cause. This approach aligns with the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and Idaho's own rules of criminal procedure, which generally require judicial authorization for searches and seizures of private property, including digital information. A warrant ensures that a neutral and detached magistrate has reviewed the evidence and determined that probable cause exists to believe that a crime has been committed, and that the evidence sought will be found in the place to be searched. This process safeguards individual rights while providing law enforcement with a legally sound basis for their investigation. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to seize the device without a warrant based solely on the suspicion that it contains evidence. This violates the expectation of privacy individuals have in their personal electronic devices and contravenes the probable cause and warrant requirements established by constitutional law and Idaho statutes. Such an action could lead to the exclusion of any evidence found on the device in court. Another incorrect approach is to attempt to access the data on the device by asking the suspect for consent after they have been detained or arrested. While consent can be a valid basis for a search, it must be freely and voluntarily given. If a person is in custody, their ability to refuse consent may be compromised, making any consent potentially coerced and legally invalid. This approach risks undermining the integrity of the investigation and violating the suspect's rights. A further incorrect approach is to rely on an informal agreement with a third-party service provider to access the data without a warrant or subpoena. While cooperation with service providers is often necessary, law enforcement must follow established legal procedures to compel the disclosure of user data. Circumventing these procedures, even with the provider's willingness, bypasses the legal safeguards designed to protect privacy and can result in legal challenges and the inadmissibility of evidence. Professional reasoning. Professionals in law enforcement should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to legal mandates and ethical principles. When faced with a situation requiring access to private information, the primary consideration should be whether a legal basis exists for the search or seizure. This involves understanding the requirements for probable cause and the necessity of obtaining a warrant, unless a well-defined exception to the warrant requirement applies. If unsure about the legality of an action, consulting with legal counsel or supervisors is crucial. This systematic approach ensures that investigations are conducted in a manner that is both effective in uncovering criminal activity and respectful of the rights of individuals. Question 2. Risk assessment procedures indicate that Boise Police Department officers have received an anonymous tip regarding potential drug activity within a private residence located in Boise, Idaho. The tip provides a general description of the activity, but lacks specific details about the individuals involved or the exact location of contraband. Considering the constitutional protections afforded to residents of Idaho, which of the following actions best adheres to established legal and ethical standards for law enforcement? Option A. Officers should disregard the tip entirely, as anonymous tips are never sufficient grounds for law enforcement action. Option B. Officers should wait indefinitely for more concrete evidence to surface without taking any investigative steps, even if it means potential evidence is lost. Option C. Officers should immediately enter the residence to investigate the tip, as the information suggests potential criminal activity. Option D. Officers should seek to obtain a search warrant from a magistrate by presenting the anonymous tip, along with any independently corroborated information that strengthens the tip's credibility, establishing probable cause. Correct answer is D. Officers should seek to obtain a search warrant from a magistrate by presenting the anonymous tip, along with any independently corroborated information that strengthens the tip's credibility, establishing probable cause. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the legal and ethical obligations to protect individual privacy and due process. Officers must act swiftly to investigate potential criminal activity while adhering to the strict limitations imposed by the Idaho Constitution and relevant statutes regarding searches and seizures. Failure to do so can lead to the suppression of evidence, civil liability, and damage to public trust. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves obtaining a warrant based on probable cause. This approach aligns with the fundamental protections guaranteed by the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and further reinforced by Idaho law, which generally requires judicial authorization for searches of private property. Probable cause, supported by sworn testimony, demonstrates to a neutral magistrate that there is a fair probability that contraband or evidence of a crime will be found in the place to be searched. This process ensures that law enforcement actions are reasonable and not arbitrary, safeguarding individual liberties. Incorrect approaches analysis. Acting solely on a tip from an anonymous source without independent corroboration or exigent circumstances is a significant regulatory and ethical failure. This approach violates the probable cause requirement, as an anonymous tip by itself rarely provides sufficient grounds for a warrant or a warrantless search. It risks infringing upon the privacy rights of innocent individuals. Entering the residence without consent and without a warrant or a recognized exception to the warrant requirement, even with a strong suspicion, is a direct violation of constitutional protections against unreasonable searches and seizures. This action bypasses the established legal safeguards designed to prevent overreach by law enforcement. Delaying the investigation indefinitely until a warrant can be obtained, even if there is probable cause, could be problematic if exigent circumstances arise, such as the imminent destruction of evidence or a threat to public safety. However, in the absence of such immediate dangers, failing to pursue a warrant when probable cause exists and there is no other legal justification for immediate entry would be a failure to diligently investigate. The primary failure here is not pursuing the warrant process when legally permissible and necessary. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes constitutional rights and legal procedures. This involves 1. Assessing the totality of the circumstances to determine if probable cause exists. 2. Identifying any applicable exceptions to the warrant requirement e.g. exigent circumstances, consent. 3. If no exception applies, diligently pursuing a search warrant by presenting sworn evidence to a magistrate. And 4. Documenting all actions and justifications thoroughly. This systematic approach ensures accountability and adherence to the law. Question 3. Risk assessment procedures indicate that during an active investigation into suspected illegal activity within a private residence in Boise, Idaho, officers develop a strong suspicion that evidence will be found. Considering the constitutional protections afforded to residents, which of the following actions best aligns with the legal and ethical requirements for conducting a search? Option A. Officers rely solely on an anonymous tip received via a non-verified online portal, without any independent corroboration, to justify a search of the residence. Option B. Officers articulate specific, observable facts that lead them to believe illegal activity is occurring and evidence will be found, and then seek a warrant from a neutral and detached magistrate before conducting the search. Option C. Officers inform the resident that they will search the premises regardless of consent, and then ask for consent to search. Option D. Officers conduct a search based on a general feeling of suspicion that illegal activity is likely occurring within the residence. Correct answer is B. Officers articulate specific, observable facts that lead them to believe illegal activity is occurring and evidence will be found, and then seek a warrant from a neutral and detached magistrate before conducting the search. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the need for timely information gathering during an active investigation and the legal and ethical obligations to respect individual rights and privacy. The Boise Police Department operates under Idaho state law and federal constitutional principles, requiring officers to balance investigative needs with due process. Missteps in this area can lead to inadmissible evidence, civil liability, and damage to public trust. Careful judgment is required to ensure that investigative actions are both effective and lawful. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves officers clearly articulating the probable cause for a search to a neutral and detached magistrate, who then issues a warrant. This approach ensures that the decision to infringe upon an individual's reasonable expectation of privacy is not made solely by the investigating officer, but is reviewed and authorized by a judicial officer based on specific, articulable facts. This aligns with the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution and Idaho Code Section 19-4402, which mandate that warrants shall be issued only upon probable cause, supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. This process provides a robust safeguard against unreasonable searches and seizures. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves officers conducting a search based solely on their own suspicion or a hunch without sufficient articulable facts to establish probable cause. This violates the fundamental requirement of probable cause mandated by the Fourth Amendment and Idaho law, potentially rendering any evidence obtained inadmissible under the exclusionary rule. Another incorrect approach is to rely on consent obtained under duress or coercion. While consent can be a valid exception to the warrant requirement, it must be freely and voluntarily given. If officers imply or state that a search will occur regardless of consent, or if the individual feels compelled to consent due to the officer's authority or demeanor, the consent is not considered valid, and the search would be unlawful. This undermines the principle of voluntary consent and the protections against unreasonable searches. A further incorrect approach is to conduct a search based on information obtained from an unreliable informant without independent corroboration. While informants can provide valuable leads, their information must be evaluated for reliability and credibility. Without corroboration, acting solely on unverified informant tips can lead to searches lacking the necessary probable cause, violating constitutional protections. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct. This involves 1. Thoroughly understanding the legal standards for probable cause and the exceptions to the warrant requirement under Idaho and federal law. 2. Meticulously documenting all facts and observations that form the basis for any investigative action, particularly those involving searches. 3. Seeking judicial review and authorization, a warrant, whenever possible and practical, especially when dealing with searches that intrude upon significant privacy interests. 4. Continuously training on constitutional rights and departmental policy to ensure actions are always lawful and respectful of individual liberties. Question 4. The assessment process reveals a situation in Boise, Idaho, where officers respond to a report of a domestic disturbance. Upon arrival, they hear shouting from inside a residence and observe through an open window what appears to be a weapon on a table. The reporting party is not immediately visible, considering the potential for immediate danger and the need to preserve evidence. Which of the following actions best aligns with Idaho law and established investigative protocols? Option A. Enter the residence without a warrant to conduct a full search for any potential illegal items, assuming the observed weapon implies criminal activity. Option B. Wait outside the residence for a prolonged period to gather more information from neighbors before attempting any entry. Option C. Attempt to gain entry by forcing the door open to apprehend any individuals inside, based solely on the sounds of disturbance and the observed weapon. Option D. Immediately enter the residence to secure the weapon and assess for any immediate threats to life. Then contact a supervisor to discuss further investigative steps and potential warrant requirements. correct answer is D. Immediately enter the residence to secure the weapon and assess for any immediate threats to life. Then contact a supervisor to discuss further investigative steps and potential warrant requirements. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a scenario that is professionally challenging due to the inherent tension between immediate public safety concerns and the meticulous adherence to established investigative procedures. Officers are often faced with situations demanding swift action, but the integrity of an investigation and the admissibility of evidence hinge on following precise legal protocols. Misjudging this balance can lead to compromised investigations, wrongful arrests, or the release of guilty parties due to procedural errors. Careful judgment is required to navigate these competing demands effectively. The approach that represents best professional practice involves prioritizing the preservation of life and public safety, while simultaneously initiating steps to lawfully secure potential evidence. This means immediately rendering aid to any injured parties and ensuring the scene is safe, then promptly contacting a supervisor and initiating the process for obtaining necessary warrants or consent for further searches, all while documenting every action meticulously. This approach is correct because it balances the immediate exigency of a dangerous situation with the constitutional rights of individuals and the procedural requirements for lawful evidence collection, as mandated by Idaho law and the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution. The Idaho Code, particularly statutes governing search and seizure, and the Idaho Rules of Criminal Procedure, emphasizes the need for probable cause and warrants for searches, with limited exceptions for exigent circumstances. This approach ensures that, while immediate safety is addressed, the subsequent investigative steps are legally sound, preventing evidence from being suppressed. An incorrect approach involves entering a residence without a warrant or consent based solely on the belief that evidence might be destroyed, without a clear and immediate threat to life or safety. This fails to adhere to the strict probable cause and warrant requirements outlined in Idaho law and the Fourth Amendment. Such an action risks violating an individual's right to privacy and could lead to the suppression of any evidence found. Another incorrect approach is to delay securing the scene or rendering aid to injured individuals while attempting to gather further information from witnesses outside the immediate area. This prioritizes the investigation over immediate safety and humanitarian concerns, which is ethically and legally unacceptable. It also risks the loss of critical evidence if the scene is not properly controlled from the outset. Finally, an incorrect approach is to assume that the presence of a known suspect fleeing into a residence automatically grants officers the right to enter and search the entire property without further legal justification. A hot pursuit may justify entry to apprehend a suspect. A full search of the residence requires a warrant or a specific, recognized exception to the warrant requirement, which must be carefully assessed based on the totality of the circumstances under Idaho law. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with assessing the immediate threat to life and public safety. If such a threat exists, immediate action to neutralize it is paramount. Concurrently, officers must consider the legal requirements for evidence preservation and search. This involves consulting with supervisors, understanding the specific exceptions to the warrant requirement under Idaho law, such as exigent circumstances, consent, or plain view, and initiating the process for obtaining legal authorization for any searches beyond immediate safety needs. Documentation of all observations, actions, and decisions is critical throughout the process. Question 5. Process analysis reveals that an officer in Boise, Idaho, observes from a public sidewalk what appears to be a large quantity of illegal narcotics being packaged for distribution inside a residence. The officer has probable cause to believe a crime is being committed. What is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the officer to take? Option A. Wait at a distance to observe further activity without securing the scene until a supervisor arrives. Option B. Approach the front door of the residence and attempt to verbally gain consent to search from the occupants. Option C. Enter the residence immediately to seize the suspected narcotics and apprehend any individuals present. Option D. Secure the perimeter of the residence to prevent the destruction of evidence and immediately contact a supervisor to begin the process of obtaining a search warrant. The correct answer is D. Secure the perimeter of the residence to prevent the destruction of evidence and immediately contact a supervisor to begin the process of obtaining a search warrant. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between the need for swift action in a potential public safety situation and the requirement to adhere to established legal procedures for evidence handling and search warrants. The officer must balance immediate concerns with the long-term integrity of any potential prosecution. Careful judgment is required to avoid compromising evidence or violating an individual's constitutional rights, which could have severe legal repercussions for the Boise Police Department and the officer involved. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves securing the scene and immediately initiating the process to obtain a search warrant based on probable cause. This approach respects the Fourth Amendment rights of the individual by ensuring that any search is judicially authorized and based on specific, articulable facts. By documenting observations and relaying them to a supervisor or prosecutor to draft a warrant application, the officer upholds the legal framework governing searches and seizures in Idaho, as outlined by Idaho Code and relevant U.S. Supreme Court precedent. This ensures that any evidence obtained is admissible in court and that the department acts within its legal authority. Incorrect approach is analysis. Delaying entry and observation without taking steps to secure the scene or seek a warrant would allow potential evidence to be destroyed or altered, hindering the investigation and potentially allowing a suspect to escape. This fails to act on observable probable cause. Entering the residence and conducting a search without a warrant, even with the belief that evidence of a crime is present, constitutes an illegal search and seizure. This directly violates the Fourth Amendment and Idaho's constitutional protections against unreasonable searches, rendering any discovered evidence inadmissible under the exclusionary rule. Contacting the suspect directly to inquire about the suspicious activity without first securing the scene or obtaining a warrant could tip off the suspect, allowing them to dispose of evidence or flee. This approach prioritizes direct confrontation over procedural correctness and evidence preservation. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and evidence integrity. This involves 1. Assessing the situation for probable cause. 2. If probable cause exists, taking immediate steps to preserve the scene without violating rights, e.g., observation from a public vantage point, preventing entry/exit if feasible without force. 3. Promptly contacting supervisors and legal counsel to initiate the warrant application process. 4. Documenting all observations and actions meticulously. This systematic approach ensures that actions are both effective and legally sound, protecting both public safety and individual liberties. Question 6. Market research demonstrates that law enforcement officers in Boise, Idaho, frequently encounter situations requiring immediate action. An officer observes a vehicle that has recently departed from a known location associated with drug activity. Upon initiating a traffic stop, the officer detects a faint odor of marijuana emanating from the vehicle. The driver is cooperative but appears nervous. The officer is aware that Idaho has not legalized recreational marijuana, and possession of any amount can lead to criminal charges. Considering the legal framework in Idaho, which of the following actions represents the most appropriate and legally sound response for the officer? Option A. Ask the driver for consent to search the vehicle without informing them of their right to refuse consent. Option B. Conduct a warrantless search of the vehicle based on the odor of marijuana, as this is sufficient probable cause for a search in Idaho. Option C. Enter the driver's nearby residence without a warrant, believing that additional evidence might be present and could be destroyed. Option D. Secure the vehicle and driver and immediately seek a search warrant from a magistrate based on the observed circumstances and the odor of marijuana. Correct answer is D. Secure the vehicle and driver and immediately seek a search warrant from a magistrate based on the observed circumstances and the odor of marijuana. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the legal and ethical obligations to protect individual privacy and due process. The officer must act decisively while adhering strictly to the Idaho legal framework governing searches and seizures. Careful judgment is required to avoid violating constitutional rights, which could lead to the suppression of evidence and disciplinary action. The best approach involves obtaining a search warrant based on probable cause. This method is correct because it directly aligns with the Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution, as interpreted and applied by Idaho courts. The Idaho Rules of Criminal Procedure, specifically Rule 41, outlines the requirements for issuing search warrants, emphasizing the need for a neutral and detached magistrate to review sworn evidence establishing probable cause. This process ensures that searches are conducted only when there is a reasonable belief that evidence of a crime will be found, thereby protecting citizens from unreasonable government intrusion. Conducting a warrantless search of the vehicle based solely on the odor of marijuana, even if it was recently decriminalized for limited personal use in Idaho, is an incorrect approach. While the odor of marijuana might have historically constituted probable cause for a search, the evolving legal landscape in Idaho regarding marijuana possession requires a more nuanced assessment. Idaho has not legalized recreational marijuana, and possession of even small amounts can still lead to criminal charges under Idaho Code Title 37, Chapter 27. Therefore, relying solely on the odor without further corroborating evidence or a specific exception to the warrant requirement, which is unlikely to apply in this scenario without more exigent circumstances, could be deemed an unreasonable search under the Idaho Constitution and the Fourth Amendment. Entering the residence without a warrant or consent, even with the belief that evidence might be destroyed, is also an incorrect approach. While exigent circumstances can justify a warrantless entry, the threshold for establishing such circumstances is high. The mere possibility of evidence destruction, without more concrete indicators of immediate and imminent danger or destruction, is generally insufficient to bypass the warrant requirement. Idaho law, like federal law, requires a strong showing of necessity to justify such an intrusion. Accepting the driver's consent to search the vehicle without informing them of their right to refuse consent is an incorrect approach. While consent can be a valid exception to the warrant requirement, it must be voluntary and informed. The driver must understand that they have the right to refuse the search. Failing to inform them of this right undermines the voluntarinity of the consent and could render any evidence found inadmissible. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of the specific Idaho laws and constitutional protections relevant to the circumstances. Officers should always prioritize obtaining a warrant when feasible. If exigent circumstances are present, they must be able to articulate specific, articulable facts that demonstrate an immediate and compelling need to act without a warrant. In all interactions, officers must respect individuals' rights, including the right to privacy and the right to refuse consent to searches, and ensure any consent obtained is truly voluntary and informed. Question 7. Compliance review shows that Boise Police Department officers have received information suggesting an individual may be planning an act of violence in Idaho. The information indicates that further details, including the specific target and timing, might be stored in the individual's personal cloud storage account. Given the potential for immediate danger, what is the most appropriate and legally sound course of action for the officers to take in Idaho? Option A. Immediately seek a warrant or court order from a magistrate to access the individual's cloud storage account, presenting probable cause for the search. Option B. Wait for the completion of a full, comprehensive investigation before attempting to obtain any information from the cloud storage account. Option C. Attempt to obtain consent from the individual to access their cloud storage account without informing them of the full scope of the investigation or their right to refuse. Option D. Directly access the individual's cloud storage account without any legal authorization, citing the urgency of the potential threat. The correct answer is A. Immediately seek a warrant or court order from a magistrate to access the individual's cloud storage account, presenting probable cause for the search. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves balancing the immediate need for information to address a potential public safety threat with the strict legal and ethical obligations regarding the handling of sensitive personal information. Law enforcement officers in Idaho are entrusted with significant power, and their actions must be grounded in established legal frameworks to maintain public trust and uphold individual rights. The urgency of a potential threat can create pressure to bypass procedural safeguards, making careful judgment and adherence to protocol paramount. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves immediately initiating the established legal process for obtaining necessary information, which in Idaho would typically involve seeking a warrant or court order. This approach is correct because it respects the privacy rights guaranteed under Idaho law and the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which protects against unreasonable searches and seizures. By pursuing a warrant, officers demonstrate probable cause to a neutral magistrate, ensuring that any intrusion into an individual's digital information is legally justified and narrowly tailored to the specific investigative need. This upholds the principle of due process and prevents the arbitrary collection of data. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves directly accessing the individual's cloud storage account without any legal authorization, relying solely on the perceived urgency of the situation. This is ethically and legally unacceptable because it constitutes an unauthorized access to private data, violating Idaho's privacy statutes and constitutional protections. It bypasses the critical oversight of a judicial officer and could lead to the suppression of evidence if challenged in court. Another incorrect approach is to delay any action until a full investigation is completed, even if the initial information suggests an imminent threat. While thoroughness is important, this approach fails to acknowledge the potential for immediate harm. Idaho law enforcement has mechanisms to address urgent situations, such as exigent circumstances that might allow for immediate action under specific, narrowly defined conditions, followed by prompt judicial review. Simply waiting indefinitely without exploring these options is a dereliction of duty. A further incorrect approach is to rely on informal requests or consent obtained under duress or without full disclosure of the officer's intent. While consent can be a valid basis for accessing information, it must be freely and voluntarily given, and the individual must be aware of their right to refuse. In a situation where an individual is already a person of interest or suspected of wrongdoing, obtaining truly voluntary consent can be difficult, and any perceived coercion would render the consent invalid. This approach risks violating privacy rights and compromising the integrity of any evidence obtained. Professional reasoning. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance and ethical conduct, even under pressure. This involves 1. Assessing the nature and immediacy of the threat. 2. Identifying the specific legal authority and procedural requirements applicable in Idaho for obtaining the necessary information, e.g. warrant, court order, exigent circumstances. 3. Consulting with supervisors and legal counsel if there is any ambiguity regarding the appropriate course of action. 4. Documenting all actions taken and the rationale behind them meticulously. The goal is to gather necessary information efficiently while rigorously upholding constitutional and statutory protections. Question 8. Market research demonstrates that effective law enforcement requires a precise understanding of jurisdictional boundaries. If a crime is reported to the Boise Police Department, but the incident itself is physically located just outside the official city limits of Boise, Idaho, what is the most appropriate immediate course of action for the responding Boise officer? Option A. Proceed with a full investigation as if the incident occurred within Boise city limits, assuming the reporting party's proximity warrants a Boise police response. Option B. Immediately dispatch officers to the incident location to secure the scene and begin an investigation, regardless of its proximity to the city limits, and sort out jurisdiction later. Option C. Respond to the incident location, assess the situation, and if it is confirmed to be outside Boise city limits, immediately notify the appropriate neighboring law enforcement agency to take over the investigation, providing them with all gathered preliminary information. Option D. Wait for a formal request for assistance from the neighboring law enforcement agency before taking any action, even if the incident is ongoing. The correct answer is C. Respond to the incident location, assess the situation, and if it is confirmed to be outside Boise city limits, immediately notify the appropriate neighboring law enforcement agency to take over the investigation, providing them with all gathered preliminary information. Explanation. Market research demonstrates that understanding the nuances of jurisdictional authority is paramount for effective law enforcement operations, particularly when dealing with incidents that may cross traditional boundaries. This scenario presents a professional challenge, because it requires immediate and accurate identification of the appropriate jurisdiction to ensure proper investigative procedures are followed, evidence is handled correctly, and legal processes are initiated in the right venue. Misidentifying jurisdiction can lead to significant delays, evidence suppression, and potential legal challenges, undermining the integrity of the investigation and the Boise Police Department's effectiveness. The best approach involves a clear and immediate assessment of the incident's location relative to established Boise city limits and any relevant interjurisdictional agreements. If the incident occurred within the geographical boundaries of the city of Boise, the Boise Police Department has primary jurisdiction. This is justified by Idaho state law and Boise city ordinances that define the territorial limits of the department's authority. Promptly initiating an investigation within this defined jurisdiction ensures that all actions taken are legally sound, and that the department can effectively gather evidence and apprehend suspects within its purview. An incorrect approach would be to assume jurisdiction based solely on the initial reporting party's location, if that location is outside the city limits. This fails to recognize that the physical location of the criminal act dictates jurisdictional authority, not the location of the person reporting it. This could lead to the Boise Police Department overstepping its legal authority, potentially compromising evidence collected and creating interagency friction. Another incorrect approach would be to delay initiating any action until a formal request for assistance is received from the neighboring jurisdiction, even if the incident clearly falls within Boise's boundaries. This demonstrates a lack of proactive engagement and an inefficient use of resources, as the Boise Police Department is best positioned to respond immediately to incidents within its own territory. Such a delay could allow suspects to escape or evidence to be lost. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to unilaterally decide to investigate the incident in the neighboring jurisdiction without proper consultation or agreement. This disregards the established jurisdictional boundaries and the authority of other law enforcement agencies, potentially leading to conflicts and legal complications. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes immediate situational awareness of location, followed by a swift confirmation of jurisdictional boundaries based on official maps and interagency agreements. When in doubt, immediate consultation with a supervisor or legal advisor is crucial to ensure adherence to all applicable laws and protocols. Question 9. The efficiency study reveals a need for resource reallocation within the Boise Police Department. Considering the principles of effective public service and community engagement, which of the following approaches best balances the department's mandate for public safety with the strategic imperative to foster positive community relations in Boise, Idaho? Option A. Eliminate all community outreach programs and redirect the freed-up resources towards acquiring the latest technological equipment for surveillance and data analysis. Option B. Shift funds from community engagement initiatives to support a new, unresearched program based on the anecdotal success of similar initiatives in other jurisdictions, as suggested by a senior officer. Option C. Conduct a thorough review of current program effectiveness, community feedback, and departmental strategic goals to propose a data-driven reallocation that prioritizes programs with the highest demonstrated impact on community well-being and crime reduction, while ensuring essential public safety services are maintained. Option D. Immediately reallocate all available funds from community outreach programs to increase the number of marked patrol units deployed in areas experiencing the highest reported crime rates. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough review of current program effectiveness, community feedback, and departmental strategic goals to propose a data-driven reallocation that prioritizes programs with the highest demonstrated impact on community well-being and crime reduction, while ensuring essential public safety services are maintained. Explanation. The efficiency study reveals a critical juncture for the Boise Police Department regarding the allocation of resources for community outreach programs. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for visible policing with the long-term benefits of building trust and addressing root causes of crime through proactive engagement. The department must make a judgment call that impacts both public perception and operational effectiveness, necessitating a deep understanding of departmental mandates and community needs within Idaho's legal and ethical framework for law enforcement. The approach that represents best professional practice involves a comprehensive review of existing data, community feedback, and departmental strategic goals, followed by a data-driven proposal for resource reallocation that prioritizes programs demonstrating the highest potential for positive community impact and crime reduction, while also ensuring continued essential public safety services. This is correct because it aligns with the principles of responsible governance and effective public service, emphasizing evidence-based decision-making. Idaho law and departmental policies generally encourage the use of data to inform resource allocation and program development, ensuring that public funds are used efficiently and effectively to meet community needs and departmental objectives. This approach also respects the democratic process by considering community input. An approach that focuses solely on increasing visible patrol units in high-crime areas without considering the impact on community engagement programs is professionally unacceptable. This fails to acknowledge the importance of proactive community policing strategies, which are often crucial for long-term crime prevention and building trust. It risks alienating segments of the community and may not address the underlying social issues contributing to crime, potentially leading to a cycle of reactive policing without sustainable solutions. Another professionally unacceptable approach would be to cut funding for all community outreach programs to reallocate resources to equipment upgrades, based on a generalized notion of technological advancement. This ignores the specific needs and demonstrated successes of existing outreach initiatives and the potential negative consequences for community relations. It prioritizes hardware over human connection and community partnership, which are vital components of modern policing. Finally, an approach that involves arbitrarily shifting funds based on the personal preferences of senior leadership, without a clear rationale or data to support the decision, is also professionally unacceptable. This undermines transparency, accountability, and the principle of evidence-based decision-making. Such an approach can lead to inefficient resource allocation, damage morale, and erode public trust. The professional reasoning process for such situations should involve 1. Clearly defining the problem and the objectives of the resource reallocation. 2. Gathering and analyzing all relevant data, including crime statistics, community feedback, program performance metrics, and departmental strategic priorities. 3. Consulting with stakeholders, including community members, officers, and relevant departmental units. 4. Developing and evaluating multiple potential solutions, considering their potential impacts on public safety, community relations, and operational efficiency. 5. Making a well-reasoned decision based on the evidence and stakeholder input, and clearly communicating the rationale behind the decision. 6. Establishing mechanisms for ongoing monitoring and evaluation of the implemented changes. Question 10. Governance review demonstrates that a Boise Police Department officer seized $1,575.50 in cash during an arrest. The officer's initial report accurately reflects this amount. However, when depositing the cash into the department's secure evidence holding account, the officer mistakenly enters a deposit amount of $1,550.00. The departmental accounting system flags this discrepancy. What is the percentage difference between the amount seized and the amount deposited, rounded to 2 decimal places? Option A. The percentage difference is approximately 1.65%. Option B. The percentage difference is approximately 1.62%. Option C. The percentage difference is approximately 1.58%. Option D. The percentage difference is approximately 1.60%. The correct answer is B. The percentage difference is approximately 1.62%. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Boise Police Department officer regarding the proper handling of seized evidence, specifically cash, and its subsequent accounting. The core difficulty lies in ensuring strict adherence to Idaho state statutes and departmental policies governing evidence management, particularly concerning the chain of custody and financial accountability. Failure to follow these protocols can lead to the suppression of evidence, internal disciplinary action, and erosion of public trust. The mathematical component adds a layer of precision required for accurate record-keeping and financial reconciliation. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves meticulously documenting the exact amount of cash seized, cross-referencing it with the initial seizure report, and immediately depositing it into the department's secure evidence holding account, as per Idaho Code Section 19-4601 et sec. and Boise Police Department General Order 3.10, Evidence Handling. This approach ensures the integrity of the evidence, maintains a clear audit trail, and complies with statutory requirements for the safekeeping of seized property. The calculation of the difference between the seized amount and the deposited amount, and the subsequent investigation into any discrepancy, is a critical step in financial accountability. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves depositing a rounded amount without verifying the exact sum against the seizure documentation. This fails to meet the standard of meticulous record keeping, required by Idaho law and departmental policy. The lack of precise documentation creates a significant risk of an unexplainable discrepancy, potentially compromising the evidence's admissibility and violating the principle of accountability for seized assets. Another incorrect approach is to delay the deposit of the cash into the evidence holding account, keeping it in a temporary, less secure location. This violates the chain of custody principles and increases the risk of loss, tampering, or unauthorized access, which is strictly prohibited by evidence handling protocols and Idaho code. The absence of immediate secure deposit undermines the integrity of the evidence and the department's financial controls. A further incorrect approach is to assume the discrepancy is minor and not worth investigating, proceeding with the case without addressing the financial variance. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a disregard for the financial accountability mandated by law. Such an oversight can have serious legal ramifications if the discrepancy is later discovered and linked to potential mishandling or misappropriation of funds. Professional reasoning. Professionals should adopt a systematic approach to evidence handling. This involves 1. Thoroughly documenting all aspects of the seizure, including precise quantities and values. 2. Immediately securing and depositing evidence according to established protocols and legal requirements. 3. Performing meticulous calculations and reconciliations to identify and resolve any discrepancies. 4. Initiating prompt investigations into any identified variances, adhering to departmental procedures and legal mandates. This structured process ensures both legal compliance and operational integrity. Question 11. During the evaluation of a call in Boise, Idaho, concerning an individual exhibiting erratic behavior and speaking incoherently in a public park, officers arrived to find the person agitated but not posing an immediate threat to others. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Boise Police Department officers? Option A. Attempt to de-escalate the situation through calm communication and assess the need for mental health support, potentially contacting a crisis intervention team if available. Option B. Immediately detain the individual for public disturbance and transport them to the nearest police station for questioning. Option C. Engage the individual in a direct, assertive manner to gain control of the situation and ascertain their intentions. Option D. Advise the individual to leave the park and return later if they are calmer, without further intervention. The correct answer is A. Attempt to de-escalate the situation through calm communication and assess the need for mental health support, potentially contacting a crisis intervention team if available. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge for law enforcement officers in Boise, Idaho, balancing the need for immediate action with the requirement to adhere to established legal procedures and departmental policy. The professional challenge lies in discerning the appropriate level of force and intervention when faced with a potentially volatile situation involving a civilian who appears to be experiencing a mental health crisis. Misjudging the situation could lead to unnecessary escalation, harm to the individual, or legal repercussions for the officer and the department. Careful judgment is required to de-escalate, ensure safety, and provide appropriate assistance. The best approach involves prioritizing de-escalation and seeking specialized assistance. This approach recognizes the individual's potential distress and aims to resolve the situation with minimal force and maximum regard for the person's well-being. It aligns with modern policing best practices, which emphasize crisis intervention training and the use of mental health professionals when appropriate. Specifically, Idaho law and Boise Police Department policy encourage officers to utilize de-escalation techniques and to involve mental health resources when dealing with individuals exhibiting signs of mental health crisis. This proactive and compassionate approach is designed to achieve a safer and more effective outcome for all involved, reducing the likelihood of unnecessary arrests or use of force. An incorrect approach would be to immediately resort to physical restraint or arrest without attempting de-escalation or assessing the situation further. This fails to acknowledge the potential mental health component and could be seen as an overreaction, potentially violating the individual's rights and departmental guidelines that mandate a tiered response to such situations. Another incorrect approach would be to ignore the situation or leave the individual unattended without ensuring their safety or connecting them with appropriate resources. This constitutes a failure to act and a dereliction of duty, potentially leaving a vulnerable individual in harm's way and exposing the department to liability. A third incorrect approach would be to engage in prolonged, aggressive questioning, or confrontation without first attempting to calm the individual. This can exacerbate the crisis, making de-escalation more difficult and increasing the risk of an adverse outcome. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with observation and assessment, followed by an attempt at de-escalation. If de-escalation is successful, the next step is to connect the individual with appropriate support services. If de-escalation is not immediately successful but the situation remains non-violent, the officer should continue to attempt de-escalation while requesting specialized assistance, such as a mental health crisis team. Only if the situation escalates to a point where there is an immediate threat to safety should the use of force be considered, and even then, it must be proportionate to the threat. Question 12. What factors determine the legality of a warrantless search conducted by an officer of the Boise Police Department when investigating a suspected drug transaction in a public park in Boise, Idaho? Option A. The presence of articulable facts that, when viewed objectively, would lead a reasonable officer to believe that crime has been committed or is about to be committed, and that evidence of that crime will be found in the place to be searched. Option B. The officer's personal belief that the individual involved is likely to be involved in criminal activity based on past encounters. Option C. The desire to prevent potential future criminal activity by deterring individuals from engaging in illegal behavior in the park. Option D. The officer's intuition that something is amiss, even without specific observable facts to support the suspicion. The correct answer is A. The presence of articulable facts that, when viewed objectively, would lead a reasonable officer to believe that a crime has been committed or is about to be committed, and that evidence of that crime will be found in the place to be searched. Explanation. The scenario presents a common challenge for law enforcement officers in Boise, Idaho, balancing the need for immediate action with the requirement to adhere to established legal procedures and departmental policy. The challenge lies in the potential for evidence to be lost or compromised if immediate action is not taken, versus the risk of violating an individual's constitutional rights or departmental regulations if proper procedures are not followed. Careful judgment is required to assess the urgency of the situation and the available legal grounds for intervention. The best approach involves officers acting based on articulable facts that create probable cause for search or seizure, while meticulously documenting their observations and the basis for their actions. This aligns with the Fourth Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which protects against unreasonable searches and seizures, and requires probable cause for warrants and many warrantless searches. Idaho law, as interpreted by Idaho courts and federal precedent, reinforces these protections. By gathering information that establishes probable cause before initiating a search, officers ensure their actions are legally defensible and uphold the rights of the individual. This also adheres to Boise Police Department policies, which mandate that officers have legal justification for any search or seizure. An incorrect approach would be to conduct a search based on mere suspicion or a hunch. This violates the Fourth Amendment's probable cause requirement and Idaho's legal standards for searches. Such an action could lead to the suppression of any evidence found, civil liability for the officer and department, and damage to public trust. Another incorrect approach is to delay action significantly when articulable facts suggest imminent danger or destruction of evidence, potentially allowing a suspect to escape or evidence to be lost. While probable cause is essential, officers must also exercise discretion and act when necessary to prevent harm or preserve evidence, provided they have a reasonable basis for their belief. However, acting without sufficient justification, even with good intentions, is legally problematic. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes constitutional rights and departmental policy. This involves a continuous assessment of the situation, identifying articulable facts, evaluating whether those facts rise to the level of reasonable suspicion or probable cause, and then acting within the bounds of the law and policy. If probable cause exists, officers should proceed with the search or seizure, ensuring thorough documentation. If probable cause is lacking but reasonable suspicion exists, officers may be justified in conducting a brief investigatory stop or pat-down for weapons, but not a full search. If neither is present, officers should not initiate a search or seizure. Question 13. The monitoring system demonstrates the interception of communications related to an ongoing narcotics trafficking investigation in Boise, Idaho. During this authorized surveillance, Officers also incidentally intercept conversations containing personal details about individuals not directly involved in the drug trade, including discussions about their financial status and personal relationships. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Boise Police Department officers involved? Option A. Share all intercepted communications, including the personal details, with other law enforcement agencies and internal departments to broaden the scope of potential investigations. Option B. Utilize the intercepted personal details to conduct unrelated background checks or inquiries into the individual's personal lives for informational purposes. Option C. Review the intercepted communications for information directly relevant to the narcotics trafficking investigation, document findings, and disregard or purge any personal information unrelated to the authorized investigation. Option D. Disregard all intercepted communications, including those pertinent to the narcotics investigation, due to the incidental interception of private personal information. The correct answer is C. Review the intercepted communications for information directly relevant to the narcotics trafficking investigation, document findings, and disregard or purge any personal information unrelated to the authorized investigation. Explanation: the monitoring system demonstrates a potential breach of privacy and departmental policy. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the need for effective monitoring with the fundamental rights to privacy of individuals, as well as adhering to strict departmental guidelines. Officers must exercise sound judgment to avoid overstepping boundaries while still fulfilling their investigative duties. The best approach involves a careful, documented review of the intercepted communications, focusing solely on information directly relevant to the ongoing investigation into illegal narcotics trafficking. This approach is correct because it aligns with the principles of necessity and proportionality, ensuring that the intrusion into privacy is limited to what is strictly required to achieve a legitimate law enforcement objective. Idaho law, specifically concerning electronic surveillance and privacy rights, mandates that such monitoring be conducted under strict legal authorization and be narrowly tailored to the scope of the investigation. Any information obtained that is not pertinent to the authorized investigation must be disregarded and, if possible, purged from records, thereby respecting privacy rights and adhering to legal limitations on data collection. An incorrect approach would be to broadly disseminate the intercepted personal information to other officers or departments without a clear, documented investigative need. This fails to respect privacy rights and likely violates departmental policies and Idaho statutes governing the handling of sensitive information obtained through surveillance. Such dissemination could lead to unauthorized access and potential misuse of personal data. Another incorrect approach is to ignore the potentially incriminating information because it was obtained through a method that might be perceived as intrusive. While privacy is paramount, law enforcement has a duty to investigate criminal activity. Ignoring relevant evidence, especially when obtained through legally authorized means, can hinder investigations and fail to protect the public. This approach neglects the investigative mandate and the potential for serious criminal activity. Finally, an approach that involves using the intercepted personal details for unrelated social inquiries or to gain personal advantage is ethically reprehensible and illegal. This constitutes a gross violation of public trust, privacy laws, and departmental conduct standards, leading to severe disciplinary action and potential criminal charges. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance, departmental policy, and ethical considerations. This involves 1. Confirming the legal basis and scope of the surveillance. 2. Identifying information directly relevant to the authorized investigation. 3. Documenting all actions taken with the intercepted information. 4. Consulting with supervisors or legal counsel when in doubt about the appropriateness of accessing or disseminating information. And 5. Strictly adhering to privacy protocols and data handling procedures. Question 14. Benchmark analysis indicates that officers of the Boise Police Department must exercise sound judgment when encountering potential evidence during routine duties. If during a lawful traffic stop in Boise, Idaho, an officer observes a small, unmarked baggie containing a white powdery substance partially visible on the passenger seat, what is the most appropriate course of action to ensure legal and procedural compliance? Option A. Secure the baggie, document its discovery and location, and immediately initiate the process to log it into evidence according to Boise Police Department general orders. Option B. Discard the baggie as it is unmarked and potentially insignificant, and continue with the traffic stop. Option C. Pocket the baggie for personal examination after the traffic stop is concluded to determine its nature. Option D. Leave the baggie on the passenger seat, assuming the driver will address it, and proceed with the traffic stop. Correct answer is A. Secure the baggie, document its discovery and location, and immediately initiate the process to log it into evidence according to Boise Police Department general orders. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for a Boise Police Department officer regarding the proper handling of evidence discovered during a lawful traffic stop. The officer must balance the need to secure potential evidence with the constitutional rights of the individual and departmental policy. Failure to adhere to established procedures can lead to the suppression of evidence, internal disciplinary action, and damage to public trust. Careful judgment is required to ensure all actions are legally sound and ethically defensible. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves securing the evidence in a manner that preserves its integrity and chain of custody, while also ensuring the safety of the officer and the public. This approach prioritizes adherence to Idaho rules of evidence and Boise Police Department general orders concerning evidence handling. Specifically, it involves documenting the discovery, taking possession of the item, and immediately initiating the process of logging it into evidence according to departmental protocols. This ensures the evidence is admissible in court and that the officer acts within legal and policy boundaries. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately discarding the item without further investigation or documentation. This fails to recognize the potential evidentiary value of the item and violates departmental policy on evidence preservation and reporting. It could also be interpreted as obstruction of justice or a dereliction of duty. Another incorrect approach is to pocket the item for personal examination later without proper logging. This compromises the chain of custody, introduces the risk of contamination or loss, and violates departmental regulations regarding the handling of all discovered items, regardless of perceived significance. It also raises ethical concerns about unauthorized possession of potential evidence. A further incorrect approach is to leave the item at the scene, assuming it is not relevant. This neglects the officer's duty to investigate and secure potential evidence that may be crucial to an ongoing investigation or a future prosecution. It demonstrates a lack of diligence and a failure to follow established procedures for evidence discovery. Professional reasoning. Professionals in law enforcement should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes legal compliance, departmental policy, and ethical conduct. This involves a systematic approach. First, assess the situation for immediate safety concerns. Second, identify any potential evidence based on observations and reasonable suspicion. Third, consult relevant departmental policies and legal statutes, such as Idaho Rules of Criminal Procedure and Boise Police Department General Orders, for guidance on evidence handling. Fourth, document all actions meticulously. And fifth, secure and process any discovered evidence, according to established protocols, to maintain its integrity and admissibility. Question 15. Market research demonstrates that law enforcement officers in Boise, Idaho, are investigating a suspect believed to be involved in a significant drug trafficking operation. Evidence suggests the suspect is currently residing in a neighboring state, specifically Oregon, and is preparing to transport a large quantity of illegal narcotics back into Idaho. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Boise Police Department officers to take regarding the apprehension of this suspect and the seizure of the narcotics? Option A. Proceed to Oregon and apprehend the suspect and seize the narcotics, relying on the fact that the criminal activity originated in Idaho. Option B. Attempt to apprehend the suspect in Oregon independently, without notifying or involving Oregon law enforcement. To ensure the evidence is secured quickly, Option C. Immediately contact the Boise Police Department's legal counsel and supervisory officers to determine the proper protocol for coordinating with Oregon law enforcement agencies for a joint operation or to obtain authorization for out-of-state action. Option D. Wait for the suspect to return to Idaho before attempting apprehension, even if it means the suspect may escape or dispose of the evidence. The correct answer is C. Immediately contact the Boise Police Department's legal counsel and supervisory officers to determine the proper protocol for coordinating with Oregon law enforcement agencies for a joint operation or to obtain authorization for out-of-state action. Explanation. Market research demonstrates that understanding the nuances of jurisdiction is paramount for effective law enforcement operations, particularly when dealing with investigations that may cross state lines. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires officers to navigate the complexities of concurrent jurisdiction, ensuring that their actions are legally sound and do not infringe upon the authority of other law enforcement agencies. Misunderstanding jurisdiction can lead to evidence being inadmissible, charges being dismissed, and significant interagency friction. The best approach involves recognizing the limitations of their immediate jurisdiction and proactively engaging with the relevant out-of-state law enforcement agency. This means initiating contact with the Boise Police Department's legal counsel or supervisory officers to determine the appropriate protocol for an investigation that extends into Oregon. This approach is correct because it prioritizes adherence to established legal frameworks and interagency cooperation. Idaho law, like that of most states, requires law enforcement officers to respect the territorial boundaries of other jurisdictions. By seeking guidance and coordinating with the Oregon authorities, the officers ensure that any actions taken within Oregon are lawful, that evidence is collected properly, and that the investigation proceeds smoothly without legal challenges related to jurisdiction. This aligns with principles of comity and the efficient administration of justice. An incorrect approach would be to proceed with the apprehension in Oregon without prior consultation or notification of the Oregon State Police. This would constitute a violation of Oregon's jurisdictional authority, potentially leading to the invalidation of any evidence obtained and disciplinary action against the officers. Demonstrates a failure to understand and respect the sovereignty of another state's law enforcement. Another incorrect approach would be to delay the apprehension until the suspect returns to Idaho, even if there is a significant risk of the suspect absconding or destroying evidence. While maintaining jurisdiction is important, the urgency of apprehending a suspect in possession of contraband, especially when there is a clear intent to distribute, often necessitates immediate action, albeit through proper channels. This approach prioritizes territorial jurisdiction over public safety and the effective pursuit of criminal activity. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to assume that because the initial crime occurred in Idaho, the Boise officers have automatic authority to act anywhere the suspect might be found. This oversimplifies the concept of jurisdiction and ignores the established legal boundaries and cooperative agreements between states. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that begins with identifying potential jurisdictional issues early in an investigation. This involves understanding the territorial limits of their authority and recognizing when an investigation might extend beyond those limits. The next step is to consult internal legal advisors or supervisors to clarify the applicable laws and protocols. Finally, proactive communication and collaboration with the relevant out-of-state law enforcement agencies are crucial to ensure a lawful and effective resolution. Question 16. Market research demonstrates that officers often encounter digital devices at crime scenes. In Boise, Idaho, an officer discovers a smartphone at a burglary scene. The officer believes the phone may contain crucial evidence related to the crime. What is the most appropriate immediate action for the officer to take to ensure the integrity and admissibility of potential digital evidence? Option A. Immediately attempt to power on the smartphone and browse its contents to quickly identify potential leads. Option B. Hand the smartphone directly to a supervising detective without formally logging it into the evidence system. Option C. Secure the smartphone, meticulously document its discovery location and condition, and immediately initiate the process to log it as evidence and request a forensic examination. Option D. Leave the smartphone at the scene, clearly marked, for the evidence technician to collect later. The correct answer is C. Secure the smartphone, meticulously document its discovery location and condition, and immediately initiate the process to log it as evidence and request a forensic examination. Explanation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the immediate need for information with the strict legal and ethical obligations regarding evidence handling and chain of custody. The Boise Police Department operates under Idaho state law and federal constitutional principles, particularly the Fourth Amendment concerning searches and seizures, and Idaho rules of evidence governing the admissibility of evidence. A critical aspect of law enforcement is maintaining the integrity of evidence from the moment it is collected to its presentation in court. Failure to do so can lead to the exclusion of crucial evidence, jeopardizing investigations and prosecutions. The best approach involves meticulously documenting the discovery and transfer of the digital device, securing it in a manner that preserves its state, and initiating the formal evidence logging process without delay. This adheres to the Idaho rules of evidence and departmental policy, which mandate a clear chain of custody for all evidence. By immediately logging the device and initiating the forensic examination request, officers ensure that any data recovered is admissible and that the integrity of the investigation is maintained. This proactive and procedural approach minimizes the risk of evidence tampering or contamination and upholds the principles of due process. An incorrect approach would be to immediately access the device's contents on the scene to get a quick look. This bypasses established protocols for digital evidence handling and could compromise the integrity of the data. It also raises significant Fourth Amendment concerns, as accessing data without a warrant or proper legal justification constitutes an unlawful search. Furthermore, it breaks the chain of custody, making the evidence inadmissible in court under Idaho rules of evidence. Another incorrect approach is to leave the device unsecured at the scene for later collection by a different unit. This creates a significant risk of the device being lost, damaged, or tampered with by unauthorized individuals. It also fails to establish a clear and immediate chain of custody, which is a fundamental requirement for evidence admissibility in Idaho courts. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to hand the device directly to a detective without logging it into the evidence system. This creates a gap in the chain of custody and raises questions about who had possession of the device and when. Without proper documentation and logging, the evidence's admissibility can be challenged, undermining the entire investigation. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes adherence to established protocols and legal requirements. This involves understanding the specific rules of evidence and departmental policies governing evidence handling, particularly for digital devices. When faced with a situation involving potential evidence, the immediate step should always be to secure the item, document its discovery, and initiate the formal evidence logging and processing procedures. This systematic approach ensures that evidence is handled legally and ethically, maximizing its utility in an investigation and upholding the integrity of the justice system. Question 17. Market research demonstrates that officers of the Boise Police Department are investigating a suspect believed to be involved in a series of burglaries within Boise city limits. During the investigation, officers observed the suspect entering a vehicle and driving into an unincorporated area of Ada County, just outside Boise's jurisdiction. The suspect is believed to be transporting stolen property. What is the most appropriate course of action for the Boise Police Department officers to take in this situation, adhering to Idaho's jurisdictional laws and professional law enforcement standards? Option A. Continue to follow the suspect and gather evidence within the unincorporated area of Ada County without notifying the Ada County Sheriff's Office, assuming their jurisdiction is implied due to the suspect's origin. Option B. Stop the suspect's vehicle within the unincorporated area of Ada County, conduct a search, and seize any stolen property, then notify the Ada County Sheriff's Office after the fact. Option C. Immediately contact the Ada County Sheriff's Office to inform them of the ongoing investigation and request their assistance or formal transfer of the investigation within their jurisdiction. Option D. Return to Boise city limits and wait for the suspect to return, hoping to apprehend them within Boise's jurisdiction. The correct answer is C. Immediately contact the Ada County Sheriff's Office to inform them of the ongoing investigation and request their assistance or formal transfer of the investigation within their jurisdiction. Explanation. Market research demonstrates that understanding the nuances of jurisdiction is paramount for effective law enforcement operations, particularly when dealing with investigations that may cross municipal boundaries within Idaho. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires officers to navigate the specific jurisdictional limits of the Boise Police Department and understand the implications of actions taken outside those limits. Careful judgment is required to ensure that evidence is gathered legally and that subsequent prosecutions are not jeopardized by jurisdictional overreach. The best professional practice involves a proactive and collaborative approach to interagency cooperation. This means immediately contacting the relevant law enforcement agency in the neighboring jurisdiction, such as the Ada County Sheriff's Office, to inform them of the ongoing investigation and to request their assistance or to formally transfer the investigation if it falls entirely within their purview. This approach is correct because it adheres to the principle of respecting jurisdictional boundaries as defined by Idaho law. Idaho Code Section 19-401 outlines the general jurisdiction of peace officers within their respective counties, and while hot pursuit provisions exist, they are typically limited in scope and duration. By engaging with the neighboring agency, officers ensure that all investigative actions are conducted with proper authority and that any evidence obtained is admissible in court, thereby upholding due process and the integrity of the investigation. This also fosters positive interagency relationships, which are crucial for efficient and effective law enforcement across Idaho. An incorrect approach would be to continue the investigation and gather evidence within the neighboring jurisdiction without informing or involving the local law enforcement agency. This is professionally unacceptable because it constitutes a violation of jurisdictional boundaries, potentially rendering any evidence collected inadmissible in court. Such actions could be seen as an unauthorized intrusion into another agency's territory, leading to legal challenges and undermining the credibility of the Boise Police Department. Furthermore, it bypasses established protocols for interagency cooperation, which are designed to prevent such conflicts and ensure a unified approach to public safety across Idaho. Another incorrect approach would be to assume that the investigation can continue indefinitely in the neighboring jurisdiction simply because the suspect is believed to be involved in criminal activity that originated within Boise's limits. While the initial criminal activity may have occurred within Boise, the physical location of the investigative actions dictates the applicable jurisdiction. Continuing to gather evidence without proper authorization from the relevant neighboring jurisdiction is a direct contravention of Idaho's jurisdictional statutes and established law enforcement practices. A final incorrect approach would be to delay contacting the neighboring agency until after significant evidence has been gathered. This is professionally unsound, as it creates a situation where evidence may be tainted or compromised due to the initial lack of proper jurisdictional authority. It also risks creating an adversarial relationship with the neighboring agency, hindering future cooperation, and potentially jeopardizing the overall success of the investigation. The professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear understanding of one's own jurisdictional limits, immediate consultation with supervisors when crossing or approaching jurisdictional boundaries, and a commitment to proactive interagency communication and collaboration. When in doubt, err on the side of caution and seek formal authorization or assistance from the appropriate neighboring law enforcement agency. Question 18. Strategic planning requires the Boise Police Department to consider how to best allocate its resources when faced with a report of unusual, but not immediately criminal, activity occurring in a public park. Which of the following responses best reflects a responsible and effective allocation of departmental resources in Boise, Idaho? Option A. Conduct a preliminary assessment of the report against departmental policies and Idaho Code to determine if a legal violation or immediate public safety threat exists, prioritizing response based on this assessment. Option B. Immediately dispatch a large contingent of officers to the park to investigate the unusual activity, regardless of its apparent criminal nature, to ensure public perception of responsiveness. Option C. Advise the reporting party that the department cannot respond to reports that do not clearly indicate criminal activity, even if the activity is unusual. Option D. Assign a single, junior officer to monitor the park from a distance for an extended period, without actively investigating the reported activity. Correct answer is A. Conduct a preliminary assessment of the report against departmental policies and Idaho Code to determine if a legal violation or immediate public safety threat exists, prioritizing response based on this assessment. Explanation. Strategic planning requires careful consideration of resource allocation and operational priorities, especially within a public service agency like the Boise Police Department. This scenario is professionally challenging because it forces a decision maker to balance immediate public safety needs with long-term departmental goals and the efficient use of limited resources. The pressure to respond to a high-profile, but potentially non-criminal, event can distract from core policing duties and strain departmental capacity. Careful judgment is required to ensure that departmental resources are deployed in a manner that best serves the overall safety and well-being of the Boise community, adhering to established policies and ethical obligations. The best approach involves a thorough assessment of the reported incident against established departmental policies and the Idaho Code concerning public disturbances and officer response priorities. This means evaluating the credible threat level, the nature of the alleged activity, and whether it constitutes a violation of law or a direct threat to public safety. If the reported activity, while unusual, does not appear to violate any laws or pose an immediate danger, the department should prioritize its core mission of responding to actual criminal activity and emergencies. This approach is correct because it aligns with the fundamental duty of law enforcement to uphold the law and protect citizens from genuine threats, while also ensuring responsible stewardship of public resources. It avoids over-allocation of resources to non-criminal matters, which could compromise the department's ability to address more pressing public safety concerns. This is supported by general principles of public administration and law enforcement operational guidelines that emphasize prioritizing calls based on threat assessment and legal standing. An approach that immediately dispatches a significant number of officers to investigate a report that lacks clear indicators of criminal activity or immediate danger is professionally unacceptable. This could be seen as an inefficient use of taxpayer-funded resources and may divert officers from responding to genuine emergencies or ongoing criminal investigations within Boise. Furthermore, a hasty and disproportionate response without proper assessment could set a precedent for responding to non-criminal, albeit unusual, events, potentially straining departmental capacity and impacting response times for critical incidents. This fails to adhere to the principle of proportionality in law enforcement actions and resource deployment. Another unacceptable approach would be to completely ignore the report due to its unusual nature. While the report may not immediately suggest criminal activity, a complete disregard could be seen as a failure to adequately serve the public and could lead to missed opportunities to address potential underlying issues or to provide reassurance to the community. This approach neglects the department's responsibility to investigate credible reports, even if they fall outside typical criminal patterns, and could erode public trust. A professional decision-making process for similar situations should involve a clear, multi-step assessment. First, gather all available information about the report, including its source and any corroborating details. Second, consult departmental policies and relevant Idaho statutes to determine if the reported activity constitutes a potential violation or threat. Third, conduct a risk assessment to evaluate the potential danger to the public and officers. Fourth, consider the availability of resources and the impact of deployment on other critical services. Finally, make a decision based on this comprehensive evaluation, prioritizing actions that best uphold the law, protect the public, and ensure the efficient and ethical use of departmental resources. Question 19. Market research demonstrates that officers must possess a keen understanding of jurisdictional boundaries to effectively uphold the law. An officer with the Boise Police Department is investigating a series of burglaries that have occurred exclusively within the city limits of Boise, Idaho. The stolen property consists of common household items, and there is no immediate indication that the burglaries involve interstate commerce, federal property, or any other element that would clearly establish federal jurisdiction. What is the most appropriate course of action for the officer? Option A. Assume federal jurisdiction due to the potential severity of property crimes and begin an investigation under federal statutes. Option B. Conduct the investigation without regard to specific jurisdictional rules, focusing solely on gathering evidence. Option C. Proceed with the investigation under the jurisdiction of the state of Idaho, adhering to Idaho statutes and the Idaho criminal rules. Option D. Immediately halt the investigation and await confirmation from federal authorities regarding their interest in the case. The correct answer is C. Proceed with the investigation under the jurisdiction of the state of Idaho, adhering to Idaho statutes and the Idaho criminal rules. Explanation. Market research demonstrates that understanding the nuances of jurisdiction is paramount for effective law enforcement. In this scenario, A Boise Police Department officer encounters a situation that could potentially fall under both state and federal jurisdiction. The professional challenge lies in accurately identifying the primary jurisdiction and acting within its established legal framework to ensure the investigation is conducted legally and efficiently, avoiding procedural errors that could jeopardize evidence or lead to charges being dismissed. The correct approach involves a thorough assessment of the facts to determine which jurisdiction has the most direct and applicable legal authority. In Idaho, state law provides the foundational legal framework for most criminal matters within its borders. If the alleged offense and the evidence primarily fall under the purview of Idaho statutes, and there are no immediate indicators of federal involvement, such as interstate commerce, federal property, or specific federal crimes, the officer should proceed under state jurisdiction. This is justified by the principle of respecting state sovereignty and the established legal hierarchy, where state laws govern unless a specific federal nexus is clearly established. The Idaho Criminal Rules and the Idaho Code provide the procedural and substantive guidelines for such investigations. Proceeding solely under federal jurisdiction without clear evidence of a federal nexus is an incorrect approach. This would be a regulatory failure, as it bypasses the primary legal authority of the state of Idaho and could be seen as an overreach of federal power. It risks violating the established division of powers and could lead to the evidence being deemed inadmissible in a state court if the investigation was not conducted according to Idaho's legal standards. Another incorrect approach is to delay action indefinitely while attempting to confirm federal jurisdiction. This is professionally unacceptable because it can lead to the loss of critical evidence, the escape of a suspect, or a failure to protect the public. Law enforcement officers have a duty to act when they have reasonable suspicion or probable cause to believe a crime has been committed within the appropriate jurisdictional bounds. Finally, assuming federal jurisdiction simply because the crime appears serious is also an incorrect approach. Seriousness alone does not automatically confer federal jurisdiction. A careful, fact-based analysis of the elements of the offense and the location of the crime is required to determine the proper jurisdiction. The professional reasoning process for officers in such situations should involve 1. A rapid but thorough assessment of the facts against known jurisdictional triggers, state vs. federal. 2. Prioritizing the most direct and applicable legal framework based on the evidence and location. 3. Consulting with supervisors or legal advisors if there is any ambiguity. And 4. Acting decisively within the determined jurisdiction to preserve evidence and ensure public safety. Question 20. The Boise Police Department is considering a new policy to reduce expenditures on office supplies by 15% annually. If the department's current annual expenditure on office supplies is $75,000, what is the projected annual cost saving from implementing this policy? Option A. Approximately $10,000 to $12,000 based on past budget adjustments. Option B. $11,250. Option C. A 15% reduction in office supply costs. Option D. The potential disruption to departmental operations. The correct answer is B. $11,250. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows that assessing the financial impact of a proposed policy change requires meticulous attention to detail and a clear understanding of relevant financial principles. This scenario is professionally challenging because it demands not only accurate calculation, but also the ability to justify the methodology used to stakeholders who may have varying levels of financial literacy. The pressure to present a clear, defensible financial projection underpins the need for a robust and transparent approach. The best approach involves a direct calculation of the projected cost savings by applying the proposed reduction percentage to the current annual expenditure for the specified equipment. This method is correct because it directly addresses the policy's stated objective of reducing costs by a specific percentage. It is grounded in fundamental financial arithmetic and provides a clear, quantifiable outcome that is easily verifiable. The formula for this calculation is projected savings equals current annual expenditure asterisk reduction percentage slash 100. For example, if the current annual expenditure is $500,000 and the reduction percentage is 15%, projected savings would be projected savings equals $500,000 asterisk 15/100 equals $75,000 This approach is ethically sound as it is transparent and directly reflects the proposed policy's intended financial outcome. An incorrect approach would be to simply state the percentage reduction without performing the actual calculation. This fails to provide a concrete financial figure, making it impossible to assess the true impact of the policy, lacks the necessary quantitative analysis, and therefore does not fulfill the requirement of evaluating the financial implications. Another incorrect approach would be to estimate the savings based on anecdotal evidence or past, unrelated budget adjustments. This method is flawed because it lacks a systematic and data-driven basis. It introduces significant potential for error and bias, failing to provide a reliable projection. This approach is ethically questionable as it relies on unsubstantiated figures, potentially misleading decision-makers. A further incorrect approach would be to focus solely on the potential disruption caused by the reduction, without quantifying the actual savings. While disruption is a valid consideration, it does not address the core financial objective of the policy. This approach fails to perform the required financial calculation and therefore does not answer the question posed. Professionals should approach such situations by first clearly identifying the objective of the financial evaluation. Then, they should select the most direct and accurate mathematical method to achieve that objective, ensuring all necessary data is available and accurate. Transparency in the calculation method and clear communication of the results, including any assumptions made, are paramount. This systematic process ensures that financial projections are reliable, defensible, and ethically sound.